Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Welcome to the Islamic Center. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Shaheen Akhtar. I am passionate about interfaith work and have spent over a quarter of a century of my life building bridges. So I'm very excited to see you all, and I deeply appreciate your presence here. On this journey, I have been blessed to have met so many incredible people and have made wonderful friendships. And Reverend Dr. Ian Maverick is one of them. And it's a privilege and an honor to have known him for such a long time. And we have done several initiatives together. And it's always a joy to work with him. And Father Carl, what can I say? He's my spiritual brother. And he's a member of our book club as well. And I can call on him anytime. So thank you, both of you. I'm so grateful to you for spending part of your afternoon with us. And thank you all for your support. You're all special, supporting all the interfaith work. So before we begin our program, let us take a moment to remember our veterans and reflect upon their sacrifices. Also, let us take this moment to hold in our hearts those who have lost their lives and those who are living with unimaginable grief, fear, and hunger during this Israel and Gaza war. So let us pray for a ceasefire and peace. So in the book, The Humanity of Muhammad, Dr. Craig Considine tries to break through the stereotypes and misunderstandings about Prophet Muhammad, a man and a messenger who changed the world. So how did he do this? What was his how-to-do manual? For Muslims, the answer is simple. The night he receives the first revelation is a central moment in his life, and it is a central moment of history. We can call the night that changed the world. So what happened on that particular night, which is referred to as the night of power? God spoke to him, and he kept speaking to him for 23 years. Prophet Muhammad is the embodiment of that speech, and we see in him the most beautiful manifestation of that speech in the person of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We can draw profound lessons from his life. He was supremely successful on both the religious and on secular levels. One example from the life of Prophet Muhammad is demonstrated by his ministry while he was in Medina. The first half of his ministry was in Mecca when he started preaching monotheism, and he was persecuted. So he moves to Medina. In Medina, in just a decade time, he transformed the society of the corrupt society in Medina into a civilized society. He brought together all the tribes, Muslims, Jewish tribes, pagan Arabs, and all the other tribes together, and they entered into a social contract which became known as the Constitution of Medina, which granted equal rights, women's rights, freedom of religion, justice, and equality for all people. And this is the first written constitution of democracy in human history. So the Prophet Muhammad's teachings continue to be relevant today. For me personally, he taught me what compassion means. I am always reminded of this incident which occurred while I was sitting in the Prophet's mosque over 26 years ago for Friday prayers. It was a very hot day, and his mosque was so packed that there wasn't even an inch space. And there was a little girl at a distance from me and trying to get my attention because I was holding a water bottle in my hand. And I wasn't paying attention to her. Then suddenly it hit me. I said, oh my gosh, here I am sitting in the Prophet's mosque. So I called her and I gave her the bottle. She drank from it and gave it back to me, and I said, keep it with you. This moment, I saw this, the happiness on her face, which I have not forgotten. And so this moment has had a profound effect on me, and I live with this experience. By sharing, especially water, water is life, is what makes us a full human being. And he taught me to give voice to the weak and the oppressed. He taught me to look for humanity in each and every one. In the book, The Humanity of Muhammad, Dr. Considine shares some of the lessons from Prophet Muhammad's life. So now, without any further delay, I would like to introduce to you our special guests, my friend, Reverend Dr. Ian Maverick. He is an ordained Baptist minister. He's a leader with a passion for building connection across differences, honoring the sacredness of each person, and creating a world based on principles of love, respect, and equity. He holds a Master of Divinity degree and a PhD in theology and ethics from Boston University. He's the founder and director of the Common Street Spiritual Center in Natick, a love-centered community that unites people of diverse faiths and cultures and weaves together themes of spirituality and social justice. Ian is a practitioner of interfaith dialogue and community building. That's why we get along so well. Recently, he served as interfaith chaplain at Bentley University. He has taught courses on various topics in religion and ethics at Emmanuel College, and published several articles and book chapters in these fields. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Ian Maverick.
Just want to thank Shaheen for that gracious introduction. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic. Shaheen and I, over the years, have had so many impassioned conversations seeking greater understanding, seeking, sometimes sparring over our little differences, but we share the same purpose to bring more interfaith unity. And I'm really glad to be here to celebrate Craig's book and everything that this represents, to be in this time where Craig, who's religiously a Catholic can feel so free. I need to speak more loudly?
Yes.
Can feel so free to, express an appreciation for the Prophet Muhammad and to come at it from this humanistic approach, being able to, go over this border which, between Catholicism and Islam, which takes a lot of courage, because even though he might not be, arrested, or he might not be attacked, yet because of our history of conflict between these faiths, I just want to point out that this is a weaponized border. It is a kind of militarized border between these faiths, because at another time, for centuries and centuries, throughout Christian history, one would not be free to say anything positive about the Prophet Muhammad. You could be curious, but if you got your hands as a Christian on a Quran and said something positive, you would be in jail. And that's important to remember, that throughout Christendom, throughout so many centuries, interfaith dialogue was simply not possible. It was not, there wasn't this kind of freedom. And so I celebrate that we have a much greater freedom now. It's interesting that Craig takes a humanistic approach, so we even have to be grateful for the whole humanistic tradition, including our agnostic and atheist friends who have opened up this space that's more neutral, where even this dialogue now can be seen and can be conceptualized in a way that it couldn't when everyone in the world was hyper-religious and religion was required. Everything was so tight then, and now we have a greater freedom. But even so, it takes a lot of courage to step across these boundaries. Craig is a brave leader intellectually, and he definitely receives a lot of threats, a lot of negative flack, and a lot of gratitude and thanks from Muslims. He's very popular with the Muslim community, but less so with some of our Christian brothers and sisters, which has been my experience too, speaking out on these same issues. So I would like to share a little bit some of the ideas that I've been working on alongside Craig, alongside a small minority of Christian scholars who are trying to turn the tide and trying to create a new paradigm of cooperation, respect, love between these two faiths. And not just between these two faiths, because we also want to see peace between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, a lot more respect there, and between really all the religions of planet Earth. So for me and my work, it's just such an interesting contrast, as Shaheen was beginning to point out, some of the obvious and kind of incredible virtues of Muhammad. Obviously, as the founder of what is becoming the largest world religion that humanity has ever known, the largest religion, who has created such a foundation for societies to thrive. But in Christian history, soon after Islam emerged, Christian thinkers began to develop demonizing rhetoric that would create, like I said, this weaponized boundary, this very harsh boundary between the faiths. Are folks aware of this history? Who knows some of this history?
I don't think so. Go ahead.
You go back to the 7th century, John of Damascus was a very popular author, and he wrote an extensive book called Against Heresies, where he refutes every single, what he called heresies, which are kind of like innovations, which are kind of differences within the Christian tradition. So he was attacking numerous different Christian sects, one by one, with a righteous vitriol that was very popular back then. And he's very articulate and smart and so forth, and he still has made some interesting, theological contributions, but he was the one who began to popularize the idea that Muhammad was a false prophet, inspired by the devil, and so forth. And that really became, a central Christian critique of Islam, to say he claims to be a prophet, but he's a false prophet, so then he's not inspired by God, he's inspired by the devil, and then the whole thing is rotten. And that's an idea that, sadly, was very popular within Christianity, not only from John of Damascus, but authors such as Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther. Major figures within the Christian tradition also continue to advance this attack. The problem with this kind of rhetoric, which could be obvious, but it is dehumanizing. It really, by dehumanizing Muhammad and really desacralizing his beautiful work, then you're really, in a representative way, dehumanizing all Muslims. You're really dehumanizing, desacralizing everything they're doing, and really, creating this dynamic where Christians who believe such things will not trust Muslims. They will not want to cooperate with them. If there's any kind of disagreement, they're not going to trust that they're going to get to an ethical place. They're going to be predisposed towards hating and not seeing Muslims as human. And this is the toxicity of this kind of belief. In today's world, you are still going to find Christians saying this. The politics are different, so you might not find as much as explicit. But the thing is, Christians, I believe, have a duty, because we're inheriting this karma, we're inheriting this negative energy, we're carrying it within our tradition. So I don't believe it's enough to just say, well, now we're going to stop saying that. And we're just going to start to say something kind of like, well, we worship the same God, and tie it back to Abraham. It's like, yeah, but when for 1,000 years you say Muhammad's inspired by the devil, you need to do better, because you've created so much negative energy, and it is still going. It is still going within Christian communities. And other forms of hate get carried by culture like that. So in this case, I've been looking at this, and Craig obviously has shown us, here is a way for Christians to appreciate the Prophet Muhammad. Here's a way for us to acknowledge that he's a prophet. For Christians, that seems radical, because they're so conditioned to hate Muhammad. They're so conditioned to see him as a false prophet. It's sad, but it's true. Even though if you looked at it objectively, it wouldn't really be that much of a stretch to acknowledge the prophet of one of the major world religions. And Christians don't do this to Buddhism. They're not saying, oh, Buddha, oh no. So they're not having that issue. They're not saying it about Moses, and they're really not attacking Confucius or Lao Tzu. They're not doing that, but because of the history of competition, because of the way this conflict has developed between Christians and Muslims, this is where we're at. And so my belief, what Craig does in this book, and what I think we have to also articulate more explicitly in the theological space, is to really make the case for the prophethood of Muhammad in a very respectful way. For me, part of it is to develop some of the ideas so that Christians can also, make this, which I don't think is a very extravagant or extraordinary claim. It seems that way. But how can Christians also stand in their own faith, not feel afraid that their whole identity is going to be annihilated if they admit that Muhammad's a prophet and that Islam's a real religion, and, which is like, well, it's, which seems like kind of absurd because it's they're both the two largest religions in the world, but it's similar to other problems, other insanities that we see of humanity, such as men acknowledging the humanity of women. Been very hard for men to acknowledge the humanity of women, even though it's half of humanity. And it's been hard for white people to acknowledge the humanity of people of other races. So we know that humans tend to make very gross errors in their judgment of others. And this is one of them. So one of the ways I've been working on this is, first of all, just to try to popularize the idea that as a Christian, you could accept Muhammad as a prophet. Why? Because it's common sense. First of all, it's just common sense. It's respect. It's respect for your Muslim brothers and sisters. Why would you assume not? And then also, it's to correct these terrible errors from the past. And then also, it's in the Bible. So I kind of go that way too. And that's where I get into most hot water with my evangelical colleagues. So like, well, you can't take away our mean Bible. I'm like, well, maybe it's more open than you think. So if you look in the Gospel of John, one of my favorite Gospels, it's different than all the rest of the Gospel versions, because there's 4 versions. The Gospel of John comes last, and the author of the Gospel of John is grappling with the fact that he's the last living disciple of Jesus. At the end of the gospel, especially, this becomes a major theme because the early Jesus followers believed that he would be back soon. So there was a very popular belief in an imminent second coming, that Jesus would be, come out of the clouds with a choir, an army of angels, crush the Romans and establish justice and just make everything good. So early Christians were really into that. Now, they were the poorest of the poor. They were struggling under Roman rule, and they believed that the end was near. And then, 10 years passed, 30 years passed, 40 years passed. The author of the Gospel of John starts to write down his final teachings, because the oral tradition needs to be preserved. And he's like, I'm the only one left. And Jesus didn't quite say he would definitely be back. He said, what if I would be back? So he's kind of dealing with this, grappling with this. And within that context, he talks about a couple of things. But he talks about, the abiding presence of the Holy Spirit, which is very important for Christian theology. This idea that God is present and Christians are staying connected with Jesus as well through a spiritual presence. And then I argue that he's also talking just about a future prophet, because the timeline expands and they no longer have an imminent eschatology. They now have a much more extended idea of what the future holds. So if you go in John chapter 15, Jesus says, when the advocate comes, who I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who comes from the Father, he will testify on my behalf. You also are to testify because you have been with me from the beginning. I look at that text and I'm like, this could fit for Muhammad. This advocate who will be sent in the future and who will, speak out on behalf of the truth. And Christians are going to speak out too, because they've been there. And maybe there's a way that Christians and Muslims are going to speak out together and talk about social justice and talk about equality and talk about all these values that we share, which is really my vision for a more collaborative, cooperative way that our faiths could be. And then he also has this phrase further in chapter 16 where he tells his followers, this is before shortly before he'll be killed. I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all the truth, for he will not speak on his own, but will speak whatever he hears, and he will declare to you the things that are to come. He will glorify me because he will take what is mine and declare it to you. All that the Father has is mine. For this reason I said that he will take what is mine and declare it to you. So many of my Christian colleagues don't want to hear this. They're like, strictly speaking, Jesus only promised the Holy Spirit, and it would strictly remain only within our Christian community. We have a trademark, we have a copyright on this. No one else is going to get any ounce of inspiration. God's strictly going to deliver it only to our community. But what I see in this gospel and what is an openness that, hey, we don't know what God is going to do next. God is going to send the truth down, pay attention, and you're going to learn something new. You're going to learn something more than even what Jesus said. In this scripture, he's saying, you just can't get it all now. So there'll need to be future prophets. There'll need to be more revelations, and God will continue to speak. And I like this passage because, as a way to kind of get a theological embrace of Muhammad, because you could say there's this real connection where Jesus is saying, all the truth, even truths that I knew, even truths that I experienced and kind of in my communion with God, but I just couldn't share them all with you because of your limits. And, in a future prophet, a future prophet will gather truth from this same universal source. And because you're maybe more advanced, you'll be able to learn something more. And that's, a truth of how prophecy really works, I believe, is that, there's so much truth, but whatever is going to be revealed is what we're really ready for in our consciousness at any time. And that's why as people we have to keep growing. We have to keep living up to the light that we have, and then hoping that more will be revealed. And so this is just one proof text I use. It doesn't prove, but what it does is it shows us that Christians can be open. We don't have to have beliefs that support a supremacy. Also, Muslims have to work on this. Most religions have to work on this problem of supremacy, where you think that your group is superior. We really need to embrace an openness. I think Craig, in this book has just laid out a really beautiful, accurate description of the prophet. So what we really will want to see happen is we want to see this kind of information into the hands of Christians. I think that's very important. I do think we have more of kind of a theological or argumentative kind of task to really make the case to Christians for why they need to pay attention to this. Why is it important for us to make peace with Muslims? And just to kind of tie it all into what's happening in our world today, there is a theory that we won't have peace among nations until we have peace between religions, peace and understanding and dialogue. And when you look at the world, in human culture, religions are the base level of human culture. They're the most enduring cultural forms, and they're the largest cultural forms, and they unite people across many different nations. Structures like nations don't last as long as religions, and they have, a powerful influence over law and behavior, but they don't have as powerful influence even over consciousness and over the way people feel as religions do. Which is why most nations, if they want to have a war, they need the religion behind it. It's hard for them to have a conflict well if they don't have that deeper validation from the religious systems. So when you have, for example, with Christianity and Islam, about 1/3 of humanity are in each of these faiths. So if you have these deep patterns of distrust, of hatred, of competition, you're creating this negative energy, and you're predisposing so many billions of people to be in conflict. If we can shift this, and because you're a Christian, you are more likely to trust a Muslim. You're more likely to have a meaningful dialogue with a Muslim. Because you're Christian, because it's part of your Christianity, you learn to appreciate the Prophet Muhammad. You learn to see that Muslims have a way of touching into the divine source, have many ways. And so when Christians and Muslims come together in a different theological picture and with different ideas, they'd say, oh, we're having a conflict, but we trust that they have this integrity. We trust that they could dig deep and connect with God, and we can connect with God, and we could talk together about, what's the best way to, deal with a water shortage, or deal with a border dispute, or deal with any of the other problems that, humanity has to face. And so I believe we do have a responsibility, and we have a really great opportunity in terms of peacemaking to just take down the temperature, take down the violent rhetoric, look at the beliefs in our traditions critically, the ones that cause dehumanization of the other, the ones that inspire hatred and mistrust. We all have them within our faiths, and we have to think about, why are we holding them? Where were they formed? Was there a war with our faith and another faith? Even within Islam, there's Shia and Sunni. So, there are so many ways that we can look deeply into our faiths and try to say, how can we resolve these issues? How can we find beliefs that when we hold them, we see the beauty of the other person? Those are the lenses we should be building within our faiths, not these distorted, dehumanizing lenses. Those should be removed. And we should instead, not even neutral, but develop the positive beliefs. The positive beliefs that create connection, that create flow, that help us find that synergy where, even though we're going to have different religions, we're going to have a way of connecting spiritually. We're going to have a way of having that deep, deep synergy that then becomes the basis for a cooperative international order, cooperative business, cooperative culture. But we really we have to do that deep spiritual work to create those connections. And it's not going to be by getting everyone to believe the same thing. It's just never going to happen that way. It's going to be through that respect. It's going to be through beliefs like Christians saying, the Prophet Muhammad, who did this amazing thing, who gave us this wonderful teaching that we now sprinkle in and bring in, and who taught us this tradition, and now we're getting more into fasting because we're learning from Muslims, and things like that just create those feelings of like trust and love and admiration. We really want to learn that. Neutrality between faiths is really just not enough. It's really just a cop-out. And it's especially not enough because of what we inherit, which is so negative. You really can't just end with neutrality. We have to go far beyond. Craig's done it, and I think others, let's be so brave to do it and to contradict, the errors, to contradict the errors of our own traditions. It's not easy. And I got called into some meetings after writing these articles. They said, well, are you saying, one of my bosses was like, I don't know if you're going to be able to stay in this association after that article you wrote, because, people are concerned. They're like, well, are you saying Muhammad is God? I'm like, no, I didn't say that. I'm just saying, Muslims are our brothers and sisters. They have a true religion. How could it not be a true religion? It's like the biggest religion out there. What do you mean? They're like, it's reasonable. So it was interesting. Talking with my colleagues, they accepted it. And it was only a little bump in the road. They didn't take away my fancy scarf, so I'm still here. And other Christian colleagues, I want to encourage them to just, rabble rouse And, you know, it's like similar to, you know, being in a sexist context and saying something wonderful about, you know, women. It's like, whoa, that's bold, you know? It's the same kind of thing, you know, or saying something anti-racist in a context where a lot of people are racist. It's like, you know, do it. Step out and let people see it for what it is. It's not, we can't hide hate behind, you know, cherished beliefs. Well, I've been saying it for so long. Who cares? It's still wrong. So with that, I want to thank you, Shaheen. Thanks everyone for being here. And I hope some of these words were helpful.
Next, you know, talk, the insight. So now, it's Father Carl. Father Carl, it's your turn. So let me say a few things about him. Both Ian and Father Carl, they have long bios. I'm just sharing a few things. Father Carl was ordained 37 years ago. He holds a Master of Divinity degree with cross-cultural specialization and a Master in Transformative Leadership and Spirituality and a Doctor of Ministry from Hartford International University for Religion and Peace. He has served in the Philippines, Sierra Leone, West Africa, and the south side of Chicago. That's a tough, in the African American community. Presently, he works full-time in interfaith dialogue and solidarity, as well as conducting research in the changing landscape of religion, religious disaffiliation, and religious secular dialogue. Please join me in welcoming Father Carl Tschudi. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm very happy to be here, and as I am the spiritual brother of Shaheen, she is my spiritual sister. And I've had the pleasure of working with Shaheen for a number of years now and participating in her passion. It's not just activities, it's about Shaheen's passion for connection. And I don't know about you, I got a feeling a lot of folks are in the same position here. We've all been caught up in the whirlwind. So anyways, I'm grateful for that, Shaheen. And Ian, who I met recently, we had some great coffee and conversation, but also because his community is pretty awesome. And I have been there a number of times for different things, for an iftar, for the Baha'i conference as well. It's what Ian is doing there is amazing. And if that's what Christianity is doing, I want to be part of that as well. So thank you so much, Ian, for that. I wanted to get at, first of all, this book, The Humanity of Muhammad, which for me was a really interesting track or pilgrimage in my own spiritual journey as a believer in God, as a Christian, and as a brother to many Muslim brothers and sisters all around me, as well as others. And I guess what struck me, because when I was studying, I had the opportunity to have Muslim teachers. In the school where I went, 40% of the student population were Muslim, and we studied together. And so I had this extraordinary window of opportunity into Islam, and my teachers were Muslim, many of them, and I had the opportunity to study a version of the Quran in English. Arabic I couldn't handle, but anyway, so I had this chance to do that. And Muhammad, and not only Muhammad, but so many other Muslims that I know and I have met, imams as well, who have been an extraordinary inspiration for me as a Catholic priest. I have said this often, and that is, I am a better Catholic priest today because of my friendships with Muslims, and my friendships with Baha'i brothers and sisters, and my friendships with Sikh and with Buddhists, and my secular humanist friends. I am a better Catholic priest because of it. And because of that, I want to share 3 things about this work of Dr. Craig with you. One of them, and about my riff on it, if you will, especially in the last part. And the first thing I want to say about that is that there are 3 things that are important to me here. One of them is, why should I be in this conversation in the first place? The second thing I wanted to underline, and Shaheen actually brought it up, and also Ian brought it up. I think we're all zeroing on very similar ground, and that is the extraordinary experience of the Prophet Muhammad in Medina. That experience there to me was extraordinary. And Dr. Craig highlights that in a particular chapter on nation-state building. So I wanted to get at that as a bridge for something else I wanted to speak with you about that goes beyond Dr. Craig. And that is that the implications that you and I have as religious believers in faith communities and the power we wield together for a new, diverse democracy. Because the democracy we have now is paralyzed. And this is not merely about our religious walk, our pilgrimage as religious believers in the unique ways and the unique avenues that God calls all of us, but that our religious commitment is all about doing this together for a new, diverse democracy in America. And I think, to me, the power that we wield, I'm not talking about political power, I'm talking about the power of compassion, the power of justice, the power of all these things that come out of our teachings and of our inspiration, that all of these things are the power that we wield, not just as individual faith traditions, but as one interfaith voice. So that's what I want to focus in on. So first of all, personal thing about, I just tapped the microphone, sorry, Cornell. If Muslims and Christians honor the one God together, the sacred text that documents the summit of the encounter between Muslims and God should have something to say to Christians about the God that we both worship. Islam has something to say to Christianity. And Ian brought that up as well. But Islam and Muslims and the inspiration of the Prophet Muhammad, and particularly the words of the Quran, all of these things have something to say to my Christian discipleship, if you will, in Jesus Christ. That's the first thing about that. The challenge, of course, is how do I find a way of remaining faithful to my respective religious path while at the same time building relationships and a sense of community that goes beyond my own religious community. And I have preached this many times in Catholic churches, that we need to look outside of our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, our gurdwaras, wherever we're at, that we need to focus in order to look out. And I think in the Catholic tradition, Ian already brought up the tumultuous history of Christian-Muslim relations through the centuries, particularly since the death of Muhammad and up through the Crusades. But what was interesting is the fact in the Catholic Church, we had a pivotal experience called Vatican II, which is in the late 50s, early 1960s, up to 1964. And in that particular encounter of church leaders from around the world, the whole way of looking at our relationship as Catholics to peoples of other faiths changed 180 degrees in one fell swoop, which means it was tumultuous from the very beginning. And since then, in the last 60 years, there's been lots of advancement of thinking about all of this, including how we Christians think about, as Ian pointed out, the prophethood of Muhammad. So I want to say, first of all, there's a document in Vatican II, and it says this, I'll just quote it. The Church rejects nothing of those things which are true and holy in other faiths. And she calls on her sons and daughters to recognize, preserve, and promote the spiritual and moral good things found among people of other faiths. 1962. Now, this is basically the work of interfaith dialogue. It's about understanding what is true and holy, and that nothing can be rejected. And that we are all called to recognize, preserve, and promote the spiritual and moral good things found among people of other faiths. Not Catholicism, not Christianity. Now, the interesting thing about this is the council made no mention of Muhammad. That's the interesting thing. Obviously, this is the most sensitive point, right? And the Catholic experts in those days decided to deal with the whole issue by ignoring Muhammad completely. So there you go. So that's how we started. Well, we got to start somewhere, right? So that's how we started. And of course, you know, the whole turn was not something that just happened on a dime. It was a whole history of Christians and Muslims. While there was lots of polemical relationships and lots of contention, that's not all there was. There was also all kinds of opportunities to be immersed in each other's cultures. And so Christians in the 8th, 9th, and 10th century were writing biblical texts in Quranic style. Okay? And many of these styles are studied today, especially in Oxford and London and other places. And, Houston, Texas, of all places as well. So we have been impacted as Christians in our history, as Muslims have by Christians. We've both, in a sense, been shaped and reshaped by each other. Not so much by religious beliefs, but by the culture that houses them. You see, it's the culture, it's our cultural identity that shapes what religion looks like for us. And so in this case, it was, the encounter between Christians and Muslims gathered steam for centuries, and especially in the 18th, 19th century, it was not so much about, for at least some Christian missionaries and others, it was not merely about being polemic or about defending the faith of Christianity, but these were scholars who had a sympathy for Islam. And one of them, Louis Massignon, who is one of my heroes, was a Melkite priest in the early 20th century, and who began what's called the Badaliya movement, where Muslims and Christians come together to pray since 1931. And they do so to this day, and if you're interested, they gather in Cambridge. Okay, so if you're interested in that. So in other words, there's been a strong melding of minds and hearts, even though the polemics and the contentiousness has not disappeared. And so as a result of all of these things, it had a huge impact on the Catholic Church and how we are to understand the larger picture outside of our little world of Roman Catholicism. The humanity of Muhammad, I want to stress, it was pointed out by our friends here, that in my interfaith experience in dialogue and solidarity, that we come to share our common humanity with all of our aspirations and hopes. Humanity equals aspirations and hopes, our religious and faith convictions, and the cultures we house them in and express them through. So our diversity and our similarities, our extraordinary history together for the good, and how we grow together in the same communities is at the heart, I think, of what Dr. Craig is getting at when he's talking about what it means to be human. To be human. We open our hearts to each other. We share, we connect, we build together. We share aspirations. We deal with problems together. To be human, for Dr. Craig, I think, is exactly that. And that's also my own experience, is to understand that the main expression of our common humanity is the power of our faith, our passion for God and our passion for humanity, and the empathy that is expressed through all the cultures that we represent. The author focuses on the profound sense of religious pluralism. Now, in the United States, I don't know if you know the history of religious pluralism in the United States. We know our experience of it in the contemporary world, but the United States has never done well with it, ever, since the very beginning, since we started burning witches in Salem. I was just at that museum yesterday, you know. We have never been really good at it. And there have been positive notes. There's been lots of racism, lots of xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, which has always been with us since the very beginning, and so many other things. But in all of these things, what helps me, along with my own faith tradition, is Muhammad's humanity. And I'm going to do this, and Shaheen's going to be very embarrassed, which I'm kind of hoping. And when I say that, in some ways, Shaheen reflects to me Muhammad's humanity. And many Muslims have reflected to me the humanity of Muhammad. That's what I mean by common humanity. It's not an abstraction. When we take on a faith, when we're fervent in that faith, when we practice that faith, we are taking on the humanity of each other and those that have inspired us. And that humanity of Muhammad, how he understood that through the revelations of the angel Gabriel and how he attempted to work them out in the culture of Ummah. That to me is extraordinary. And the migration of the Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina, as was pointed out, known as Hijrah, was a significant event in Islamic history. Dr. Craig mentions it took place in 622 Common Era, after the Prophet received an invitation from the people of Yathrib, which was later called Medina, to join them to resolve disputes between the clans, which was the very problem the Prophet Muhammad was in Mecca. Okay? The hornet's nest there was a hornet's nest in Medina. And the migration marked really not only the beginning of the Islamic calendar, but the establishment of the first Muslim community in Medina. Although Islam was already there, as we know. The migration, the faith of Islam was already in Medina. In Medina was a mixture of Arabian polytheism, Christianity, especially Syrian monks, Judaism, Semitic religions of different types, and so on. And it was here because Medina was first founded by Jewish tribes. And then it became very multicultural and very multi-religious. And in the process, of course, became a big confused mess. Just like the USA. Islam entered in a time before Muhammad, and which was, to me, very interesting. So in a sense, they already understood that the faith of Islam had something not only to say, but something to heal in the dis-ease of the people of Medina. And they knew that already. So they had invited, as you know, Muhammad and Abu Bakr, I think it came with him at that time. Noteworthy in the connection, I thought, for me, was the Jewish community there. The Holy Quran, as Dr. Craig says, that the Jews are God's chosen people. In the Quran, chapter 45, we did for sure grant to the children of Israel the book and the authority to judge by the book and prophethood. And we provided them with pure, wholesome things and exalted them above all other peoples of their time. Okay? And one more thing, I just want to do this before I get into what I have real passion about. And that is, as Shaheen mentioned, the Constitution of Medina, which is extraordinary. I don't know of anything like it anywhere. Maybe there is something out there, but to me it was extraordinary. Ian pointed out as well. And I just want a quote from Dr. Craig about this, because it was a time, of course, when religious pluralism was seen as a gift and as an opportunity to build a nation or a city-state together. Religious pluralism. And this is what Dr. Craig says. He says, identity and loyalty were no longer to be based on family, tribe, kinship, or even religion. The overriding identity was membership in the Ummah of Muhammad. The Constitution of Medina decreed that the citizens of the Islamic State were one and indivisible, regardless of religion. Be they heathen, Book of the People, or Muslims, or the Book of the Gospels, Christians are often called in the Quran. All those who were subject to the Constitution belonged to the same Ummah. That's what that's to me is awesome. And in doing so, he created a tolerant, pluralistic government which protected religious freedom. Now, it sounds very ideal. And I don't know all the struggles that Medina went through in the process of trying to make this real. And I got a feeling it was not easy. I got a feeling like our country today, where we are threatened by pluralism and threatened by, for all kinds of different reasons that are very cultural, that I would imagine in their day it took a long, long time for them to come home together with this. But that said, this to me was seen as the beacon of light for anyone of any faith. Now, the final part of this, I just wanted to share a little bit about another inspiring Muslim for me is Eboo Patel. And Eboo Patel was one of those guys who sort of got me into interfaith work in the first place. When I met him when he was part of Interfaith Youth Corps in Chicago. And now he is co-founder of Interfaith America. And Eboo Patel is very prolific. He has some wonderful books. If you ever have a chance, read his Acts of Faith. That was the thing that got me, was his journey with the Interfaith Youth Corps. But the humanity of Muhammad, using Eboo Patel, has something to say to America, I think. Just as every Muslim who reflects Muhammad's humanity through their devotion to God, and all of us who also reflect our humanity through our devotion to God in our own ways, that all of these things are, that we do this together. That nation building is about building our common humanity together. He says here, Eboo Patel, America needs a place where people who disagree about heaven can work together on important issues here on earth. Not only that, but each of the religious institutions are crucial to a diverse democracy. Our one interfaith voice holds a power that none of our singular traditions can hold on its own. That our one interfaith voice holds a power when we join our humanities together, our voices, our hands, and our hearts. And I say this from the Christian point of view, and especially the Catholic point of view, where our religious institutions are no longer trusted in the United States, particularly by our younger generations. And when I was first involved in interfaith dialogue, we used to ask the question, well, who's not at the table? Well, half of my young congregation's not at the table right now, so that kind of thing. So we started looking at not only folks who are in our religious communities, who are devout in our religious practices, but also the majority who are outside of our religious communities in the United States. And I know from a Catholic point of view, there's about at least 40 million ex-Catholics in the United States. That our institutions are not a place of solace and mercy and generosity for many, many people. And this has a lot to do with my own research in religious disaffiliation, to find that God is speaking not only through our religious communities, but outside of them as well. And that's very important to consider, I think, with regard to what Ian's point is, that the prophethood and the inspiration and the humanity of Muhammad is something that speaks to all of us. Eboo Patel says this. He was interviewed. He had just written a book called We Need to Build, Field Notes for a Diverse Democracy, which is really a blueprint for an exclusive 21st century democracy that we're still struggling with. We're still struggling to create. A far cry from our divided democracy. And this is what he says. Here's what worries me. Half of the time when I'm giving a public presentation, the first question about religion is a negative question. What do you think about Islam and violence? What do you think about the Catholic Church and the pedophilia crisis? Why do so many people hate gay people? Yes, I'm closing up. Okay. I'm closing up, Right, I understand. Thanks. All right. So at any rate, so that said, he says, I tell you what I find encouraging. Catholic sisters keep on doing what Catholic sisters do, which is taking care of the poor. There are 10,000 migrants in Chicago, and leadership recently welcomed them into the city. But they have not adequately been prepared for those people when they come. Oops, sorry. So what happens is, and I want to say something too about Ismaili Islam as well, who have an extraordinary network of social agency and help in 30 countries worldwide. Religious institutions are doing what religious institutions do, and that is take care of people, take care of the homeless, counsel addicts, and so on. So what we're doing now in our religious communities, I think, is something that we need to bring to the fore. That, first of all, our religious communities need to come together to build a new diverse democracy, and the power of our religious communities is absolutely central to a diverse democracy. That we have to see ourselves not merely within our congregations and within our rituals and traditions, but how they feed the wider world all around us. And I think the Constitution of Medina and this extraordinary way of depicting the humanity of Muhammad is just a powerful way to help us to understand what we should be doing together today. And that to me is at the heart of it. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Father Carl. Thank you so much for beautiful insight you really got us into thinking so many things. So now we'll open it up for Q&A, questions you may have. Yes, Nazda?
Hi, Assalamualaikum, salam alaikum. My name is Nazda Alam, and I'm a member of ICD in India, and I'm a practicing Muslim, but I'm not a religious scholar.
Okay.
And I am with the less fortunate people in any religion. So my question will be kind of religious, social, political question. So, yeah. So my question would be how we explain separation of church and state. And that sounds like because of the Christianity was powerful for church. We don't have separation of mosque and state. We don't have separation of temple or the state. But the concept, you know what I mean? The concept, we know that that should be, but reality is we don't do that. So second point, question is how we are in a safe place, beautiful mosque, we drove in beautiful car, we'll go back to our nice living room. But the reality is, how do we give this message to the unfortunate who are on the street? They don't need the religious scholar. They just need to do the humanity practice, how we do it. And I'm sorry that I'm taking time, but this is my question to them. That another thing is, I feel recently what's going on in the world, are we be able to say the truth, or we will be quiet? That's one. And if we tell the truth, a truth should be consistently across the world, across the community, across the religion, right? So this is my question, and I don't want the answer, but I wanted to just say who I am. Thank you.
No, thank you, Nazda. Your question is has many steps to it. I just want to share one thing that I read. If we can spend $22 billion, there will be no homelessness in the entire country. So just think about that number and just think about, what's going on.
How about around the world?
Yes, right. So, Ian, you want to answer some of it? And folks, we don't have much time. And so, should we take some more questions? Are there any other questions?
It's a great question.
This is a great
Okay, so we will just spend time on that. Okay, I do have a question. So I hope we get time. All right, come to the podium, please. All right. Father Carl, you want to be part of in it too? Okay, all right. Okay.
We'll do a duet on this.
Okay, all right. So, here.
I love the question because I think it points to what is possible when we move from the negative conflictual relationship between Christians and Muslims and Jews and people of different faiths.
I need you to repeat the question, please.
The question's about how do we reach not the religious scholar, but the poor people in the world? How do they get this message? How is this relevant to them? And I think it's relevant because if we can stop fighting each other and really get that synergy and work together, maybe they get the message if Christians and Muslims were working together to meet the needs of the poor. If we were together advocating for the needs of the poor, they would feel, and experience what this means when we come together as people of faith. And as Shaheen was mentioning, war is very expensive. So the more money we want to spend killing each other, the less money that we're going to have to end the homelessness, address hunger. And really, when we're in that crazy conflict, we can't take care of people. And many of our governments have this problem where they're so committed and so focused on preparing for war and fighting wars, and all of that activity is directly what takes away from being able to meet the needs of citizens, provide housing, provide healthcare, make sure everyone's fed. We're not able, it turns out, to fight total conflict and also do that. And I think that's why we need to do the peacemaking work.
Yeah, just briefly, but first of all, thank you for your work and for your perspective, because it's beautiful. But for me, that's what we do. That's what religious communities have always done. We are there for each other. It's the poorest that have gathered around faith. And it is our religious communities and even our religious institutions that do that. They do that in this country, and they do that in all over the world in other ways. I've often told folks in Catholic communities, I said, we Catholics, we're not going to change this world by ourselves. We're going to do it together with others, people of other faiths, who are as concerned about our common humanity as we are and involved in doing that. So I think it's our religious compassion, our religious empathy, our charity and justice, which has been changing the world all the time. That doesn't mean there aren't problems. There's plenty of problems going on, but it is what we do. It's probably one of the most valuable things it's our theological frameworks, our creeds, our doctrines, our beliefs. They all are a vessel for this, for how we change the world together. So, and I think a lot has been done. I have seen it I've served in 3 continents in the world. And so I have seen with my own eyes extraordinary people of little means or no means, and who have done so much and are leaders in their communities. So I think, in a way, that's the flame we need to fan, for today, is to continue to do that.
Oh, and Shaheen reminded me we have to speak about the second part of the question, which was also really important. A few different things you brought up. One about the separation of church and state, and one about the current war situation and how do we find a voice, how do we speak out. And I think, separation of church and state, as a Baptist, it was invented by Baptists. Roger Williams in New England was talking about the separation of church and state because Massachusetts Bay Colony was a theocracy, and you couldn't be anything but a Puritan, in this state. And so he was preaching, for example, against state religion and against the colonists who were murdering indigenous people and taking all of their land, claiming that they had a God-given right to do this. And Roger Williams was one of the ones who spoke out. He said, well, we need churches that are separate from the state so that we could speak out and critique what the government's doing. And then they said, well, you have 24 hours to leave on pain of death. And then he left and started Providence, Rhode Island, with permission of the indigenous people, and he got a charter, and it was the first pluralistic colony. Similar to what the prophet did in Medina, Roger Williams was the first one to say, Muslims, atheists, Quakers, Catholics, all welcome in Providence. And then he started the Baptist religion in America and quit after 2 years. It's a very interesting founder. Quit after 2 years. But today we have, this terrible war going on. And when I think about truth, the truth is what reminds us of what speaks to the truth of the value of each human being, the truth of the sacredness of each person. That is so starkly, nothing else contradicts that more than murdering a person. So murdering a person is a crime against God, it's a crime against humanity, it's just a contradiction of what is true. The human being is true. The cause you're fighting for, the reason you're killing is false. In pretty much every case except maybe a fraction of self-defense cases where, you're really just defending and saving lives through your attacks. And actually the Prophet Muhammad has a lot of ethics around that developed in the Muslim movement. But I think as people of faith, we do need to speak out, and I think we need to talk about, the way this war is dehumanizing. It's built on a foundation of dehumanization. So, we know that Gazans are not seen as fully human in terms of the lens of the Israeli Defense Force. We know that isn't there, so we have to speak out and we have to say that, regardless of the Hamas attack, that doesn't take away the value of human life in Gaza. It doesn't take away from what, one child's life is worth, even though other people did a terrible act. And I think we have to just wade into it, and even as I wade into it, we have to be willing to make mistakes. None of us can just speak the whole truth with one word, and it's very complex, and I think we just need to have a conversation that is way more open, and I think the more we talk about it, the more we process it, we're going to come to the conclusion that war is not the answer to solve this, that we should not be spending billions and billions of dollars to continue the conflict, but that we should be solving it, and we should be making sure that people have what they need and are safe and have functioning governments and are not armed to the teeth to kill each other. And we'd have to look at our whole country. We'd have to look, for Americans, we'd have to look at the whole way we do things because so forth.
Sorry, so I just wanted to give others a chance. Do you have any are there any questions, friends? David? Or a comment or question?
I will ask a question that will have some...
Do you need this?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I appreciate so much what Ian just said, and I for one, will be in Copley Square at 1 tomorrow over this horrific war. As I was listening to Ian, I thought, as an inhabitant of the West, is it not true that our inability to welcome the messenger, Muhammad, is related to empire and is related to a problem that leads to repeated genocide? The genocide that founded this country an empire modeled on the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, when its Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, didn't the Roman Empire recruit the Christian institutions to its own imperial mission? And then the genocide against the black people who were kidnapped by the Europeans to come here to work and slave. At the same time that they went and drove the Jews out of Spain, based on a racial theory that they concocted when the Jews turned out not to be very good at converting to Christianity. That's my understanding of the racial theory, leading to horrific pogroms against Jews for centuries in Europe, culminating in the Holocaust, whose victims have now been turned over at the service of the bigger empire that we live in to commit another, what appears to be a genocide.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your, okay, we'll take one more. Yes. Please make it short. I want to be respectful of the time. And if you guys are willing to wait, we will take more questions. Yes, Arthur?
Common question about
Yes.
What the churches, I'm a full believer in separation of church and state. And I'm wondering if anybody knows if the United Nations Charter addresses that. If it doesn't, that should be in the UN Charter, that no nation should, any nation of the world should have within their own constitution that there should be separation of church and state. Otherwise, it's not a true democracy.
Thank you. Thank you.
The other thing is this, as far as the different churches in this country, I think more has to be done. What you're doing here with having interfaith.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go to my Catholic church, a lot of times there isn't nothing going on. I mean, as far as that, I mean, I love
Yeah,
messages,
yeah.
but there should be
Right.
where we welcome you, they welcome us. They don't. So this message is.
So you have something to do. You need to go and tell everyone that, hey, I went to the mosque and there was this interfaith gathering. And so, you know, I'll let you know next time. So bring the whole flock. That would be great. We will have such a feast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you.
I just have one.
Yes, Jean.
Love is the bottom line of everything I've heard here today.
How true, yes.
And, I mean, like, I have family that don't speak to me for years.
Mhm.
I know you better than my own family. And I
Oh,
love,
that's
I love
very
them, don't get me wrong. I also love you
Thank you,
in
Jean.
a very special way, I love you.
Thank you so much. I'm so touched. I'm so touched. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. So I guess it's time to close our gathering. We do want to talk more and continue this dialogue. And Ian has graciously offered to be here, continue this dialogue. And of course, my brother, Father Carl, is always here. So, you know, I think it's what we are seeing is that we need to have more conversations. So after the holidays, we'll get together. And so I want to thank you, all of you, so much. And with deep gratitude, Prophet Muhammad said, when you see something wrong in the society, try to change it with your hands. And if you are not able to do so, try to do it with your tongue. And if you're not able to do that, at least feel it in your heart that you could make a difference. Thank you so much, and peace be with you all.